Welcome to War Stories. In this episode, I'll be discussing the Dogtown Reefer. Dogtown Reefer is an Hispanic American gang located in the William Meade housing projects near downtown LA. During the 1890s, the Dogtown community consisted of rundown homes and poor Irish, Italian, and Mexican immigrants. Located just north of the central business district of downtown Los Angeles. They got their name from a nearby Los Angeles city dog pound. It's also suggested that this community received its name because of the numerous stray dogs roaming their neighborhood. Multiple sources say that this theory is most likely not true because the city of Los Angeles had an aggressive dog catching policy that went into effect in 1872. Dogtown was originally a small section inside of an Italian enclave that was dominated by Sicilians. The gang originally paid taxes to the College Park Gang, also known as the Matranga family from New Orleans. This was until Joe Ardizzone and his North End gang started the Great War of 1906. After the North End gang won the war, they formed a friendship with the Dogtown gang and recruited Sicilians in their gang. This transpired during the 1910s. By the 1920s, the North End gang, under the blessings of the New York Mafia, became the Los Angeles family, run by Rosario Desimone and Joe Ardizzone. Once the Sicilians and Italians became assimilated with American society, they thrived and were prosperous and relocated to other cities. By the late 1920s, the Italian enclave section was predominantly Latino, and so were the Dogtown gang members. Joe Ardizzone disappeared in 1931, and his successor Jack Dragna had no ties to the Mexican community. During the late 1930s, the city began to demolish buildings and residential homes in the Dogtown community. Dogtown was one of the several neighborhoods in the city flagged for slum clearance in 1938. The 1937 Housing Act provided $500 million to local authorities for slum clearance and low-income public housing. Los Angeles was one of the first cities to apply for Housing Act funding and was initially granted $25 million, the most any city in California has been awarded. The William Meade homes were originally known as the Ann Street Project. It was constructed in 1942 and partially occupied by 1943. Initially, it was built to house American soldiers, but would later house low-income residents. It was also part of the Negro quota system, which mandated a maximum of 7% black occupancy. This changed to 15% in January 1943, and was completely removed in July 1943 after pressure and protest by the California Eagle, the Los Angeles Sentinel, and NAACP. The William Meade homes would go on to be the base of Dogtown, and the projects were added to the Dogtown name. Dogtown Reefer uses the bulldog with a spiked collar as its mascot. Throughout the 70s and the 80s, the Chico's Clique started another Dogtown set in Highland Park, off Monte Vista Street. This Dogtown gang later went to the state of Utah and started a new set there. The Dogtown gang are mainly known for beefing with Eastside Clover Street and the Avenues. In 1998, Dogtown and the Avenues were heated rivals, actively engaging in warfare. That gang war fomented back and forth assaults, ranging from civil assaults to murder. On August 29th, 1998, around 6:15 p.m., Stephen was playing in the street with about 6 or 7 friends. They were playing on Avenue 58, which is a dead end near the intersection of Benner Street. Several older people were hanging out too near the kids. The adults included an older man named Big D and 3 members of the Avenues gang, which included Richard, Daniel, and Joaquin. A dark pickup truck drove up. It stopped about a quarter of a block away from the group. The truck, occupied only by a male Hispanic driver, parked at an angle near an apartment complex. According to Joshua, Richard or Joaquin walked toward the truck throwing up gang signs. In response, the driver threw up his own gang signs. The Avenues gang members on the sidewalk then gestured for him to come over. None of the Avenue gang members had a gun at that time. At that point, the driver pulled out a gun, raised it out the window, and began shooting in the direction of Joshua and his friends. Joshua and his brothers ran off. When he looked back, Joshua saw Stephen lying on the ground. He had been shot. After 4 to 5 gunshots, the driver immediately took off. The driver would later be identified as Alvaro from the Dogtown gang. 12-year-old Stephen died from a gunshot wound to the head. That same night after the shooting, Alvaro drove his girlfriend Sheila's house. Sheila claims he was very nervous and shaky. He initially told Sheila and her family that members of his gang had shot members of another gang and that there would be a green light on his gang. The next day, Sheila and Alvaro saw a report in the news that a 12-year-old boy had been shot. The reporter said that the police were looking for a suspect with a blue truck. Alvaro drove a blue pickup truck. The next day, Alvaro told Sheila he was going to his parents' ranch in Mexico and asked her to come with him. She initially declined, but later agreed after he said they would only be there for about a week or two. Sheila and Alvaro took a bus to Mexico. They were unable to travel any further because the bridge had collapsed due to heavy rain. Alvaro became very nervous, believing someone was following him. He told Sheila he had to get a plane to fly out. When she asked him why, he said, "Remember that news we saw on Sunday? Well, that was me. That's why I'm nervous." Alvaro buried the gun and sold his truck to a friend. He told Sheila she would never see her parents or return to the United States again. Alvaro and Sheila lived in Mexico for about 2 years. They lived a very primitive lifestyle in a remote area. Sheila wanted to leave because Alvaro was very violent with her and would beat on her and use drugs. Alvaro would threaten to kill her if she tried to escape. After about 2 years, Alvaro finally agreed to let Sheila visit her relatives in Guadalajara. Coincidentally, when Sheila and Alvaro went to her grandmother's house, Sheila's parents were visiting at the same time. Sheila did not leave them with her family, but a few weeks later, Anan and her parents were able to arrange Sheila's escape from Mexico. Sheila returned to California in December of 2000. When she returned, Sheila lied to police about Alvaro's whereabouts in Mexico. Her parents told her not to say anything. They were afraid, and so was Sheila. In 2006, the LAPD was notified that Alvaro had been arrested in Mexico and was facing extradition. Under a recently enacted treaty, Alvaro was returned to the United States in 2007. During trial, 2 members of the Avenues and his ex-girlfriend testified. Alvaro was ultimately found guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to life in a state prison without the possibility of parole. Dogtown is also well known for beefing with the Clover Street gang. Eastside Clover Street is a predominantly Hispanic gang located in Lincoln Heights area, just east of the LA River. The gang formed on the 600 block of Clover during the early 1900s. They are in close proximity to the Dogtown projects. On July 1st, 2001, Joseph and his mother Veronica, along with Danny and his girlfriend, attended a party in Lincoln Heights. Joseph and Danny were both members of the Clover Street gang, and the party was located in their territory. Around 3 a.m., the group left the party and walked to their car. Veronica got into the rear passenger seat of the car, while Joseph and Danny stood on the sidewalk. Veronica then saw a Latino male run behind Joseph and Danny and began shooting. Veronica heard about 5 to 10 shots. Her son Joseph was killed immediately, and Danny was wounded. Joseph died from multiple gunshot wounds, most of which entered his body from behind. On August 5th, 2001, an LAPD officer was on patrol when his attention was called to a Jeep parked on the side of the road. Anthony approached the car and told the officer that the car belonged to him. The officer found a 9mm Glock loaded with an 18-round magazine under the driver's seat of the Jeep. Anthony admitted ownership of the gun and identified himself as a member of the Dogtown gang. The officer confiscated the gun. Anthony's gun was not tested until 2007. At that time, it was found to match the bullets, casing, and fragments recovered from the Joseph shooting. Veronica, who saw the shooter only from the nose up because his face was partially covered, was unable to identify Anthony in the photo lineup. In the early morning of April 14, 2007, Prisciliana and Charnel, who was from the Clover Street gang, left a restaurant located on 20th Street and North Broadway, near downtown LA, with another couple also associated with the Clover Street gang. Prisciliana drove, Charnel was in the passenger seat. As they headed toward the intersection of North Broadway and Lincoln Park Avenue, Prisciliana was approached on the passenger side by a blue minivan. As the minivan drew close, a man wearing a black sweatshirt with flames on his sleeves began firing shots at her car from the open sliding door of the van. Prisciliana drove faster to escape, but the van followed. Prisciliana braked. As the minivan passed, she locked eyes with the driver. Realizing Charnel had been shot, she drove directly to a nearby hospital. The minivan continued driving in front of her car until she entered the hospital. Charnel died from a gunshot wound to the chest. Shortly after the shooting, an LAPD officer saw a light-colored minivan parked on the street. When the officer approached, a man got out, crossed the street, and fled. The minivan sped off. The officer pursued the minivan until it came to a stop near an overpass. A Latino male got out carrying a bag and ran toward a fence separating the road from a nearby railroad track. The man then threw the bag over the fence, climbed after it, and ran down the railroad track. Anthony was later convicted of the murder of Joseph, as well as the murder of Charnel. He was sentenced to life in a state prison. One evening in July 2010, a sheriff deputy drove an unmarked car near the housing projects along the boundary of Dogtown territory. He made eye contact with the driver of an oncoming car, Miguel. Miguel made a U-turn and pulled alongside the sheriff deputy so that his passenger, Ruben, was within 2 feet of the sheriff. Ruben pointed a handgun at the sheriff and then said, "Oh shit, he's a cop." Miguel then drove away speeding. The sheriff deputy was Hispanic. His hair was cut very short. He was wearing a uniform. The sheriff followed the car as it turned into the housing projects, and the deputy called for assistance. A helicopter searchlight showed Miguel and Ruben standing by an abandoned sofa in the projects. They were eventually apprehended. They were both convicted on 1 count of assault with a semi-automatic weapon. I'd like to thank you guys for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe.